All right, let's have a look next at this article on Vox. The animal rights movement was once locked in bitter debate. Now it's getting things done. Bit of hopium, anyone? This is from August 2024, so it's about a year ago. From Vox's Future Perfect series. Let me link this up in the chat. Go ahead and pin that. Nice. Let's read. It's one of those facts of the world that most people know but don't really want to know. Billions of animals on factory farms live their lives in gruesome and torturous conditions so that our eggs and meat are a bit cheaper. Virtually no one really approves of it, but almost everyone participates in it. This is a recurring theme in these pieces, right? There is a high degree of consensus that factory farming is bad. We shouldn't be... Right, here we go. Percent of people agreeing that animal welfare is important in my country. Farm animals and companion animals very, very close together. So just trailing by a few percentage points the percentage of people who say that farm animal welfare is important compared to companion animal welfare, right? Their own pets. People really do have like very pro-animal attitudes when you ask them about it. So, if you wanted to change that, what should you do about it? When I was in college, activists for animals had some passionate disagreements about which approach to take. A lot of them favoured leafleting, handing out flyers with grotesque pictures of the horrifying conditions on factory farms, with the idea of shocking people into change. Others favoured protests in restaurants and grocery stores, or daring rescues of dying animals from confinement. Some people hoped we could obviate meat altogether with plant-based or lab-grown alternatives, while others wanted to work towards gradual legislative change. I feel like you could do all of these things concurrently. Or not literally concurrently, right? If you're researching cell-cultivated meat, you probably don't want to do that at the same time as you're protesting the grocery store. Sounds inefficient. One division was between people who called themselves animal rights activists, working towards a world where we did not treat non-human animals as property, but acknowledged them as individuals, and people who called themselves animal welfare activists, and who tended to favour interventions to make the processes by which we raised and killed animals for food more humane. EAs versus activists. Uh-oh. The growing effective altruism-inspired giving to animal advocacy tended... Effective altruism-inspired giving to animal advocacy tended to come down on the animal welfare side of the spectrum. True. Consider lobbying to make a factory farm slightly more humane, even as it still subjects animals to awful conditions. Many animal rights activists feel like that amounts to complicity in the abuses, and that even supposedly more humane farms would go on to perpetuate. Effective altruists, by contrast, tended to jump at such opportunities. After all, 10% better conditions for animals, while hardly perfect, is still better. Many sanctuaries for rescued farm animals were bitter about effective animal advocates' disinterest in funding them. Yeah, okay, that's true. This is something that Gary obviously talks about, isn't it? Effective animal advocates, in turn, would grimly observe that sanctuaries simply don't have that many animals in them compared to the number in factory farms. It was a matter of numbers. I mean, that is my view, frankly. I do think the sanctuaries thing is tough because to some extent this is like a war of resources, and it's whether we can amass more resources than the meat industry can for trying to influence things in various ways. And it's not that feasible to have sanctuaries full of hungry animals that are quite expensive to maintain, like sapping what are movement resources. Sucks for those animals that are, want to have a nice place on a sanctuary, but it is a continuous drain of resources that could be funding Go Vegan ads and, stopping so many more of those animals going into the system. I understand that the intuitive response is to feel something for the individual animal who you do have in front of you and can interact with and is on the sanctuary or whatever. My dog's sitting over there, right? And I would, of course, never be like, okay, I'm going to cast my dog out into the wilderness in order that I can donate the resources that I use to feed him to stop some dog farming. But that's because I'm emotionally involved, right? And if I wasn't, and if I was impartial, and if I was looking at, you know, somebody and some animal that they can either feed and maintain infinitely or put those considerable resources towards preventing fewer animals coming into the system and suffering, I would be looking at the numbers there, unfortunately. Unfortunately for those would-be sanctuary animals, right? I mean, again, it sucks, but you have to think about this in terms of it's a war of resources. A big thing that we do in Vegan 2.0 is giving to these charities so that the movement has more resources to fight the war. I mean, it's like a white elephant, right? That's literally a term where it's like a gift that, appears to be a good thing, but in fact, it turns out it's quite bloody expensive to keep a white elephant, right? That's why the white elephant sanctuaries are not going to be that feasible in the long term. That's my view. There was also a difference in ethos. Faced with an atrocity, some people are drawn to splash themselves with blood and march down the street, trying to make passers-by realise the magnitude of the horrors they're complicit in. Other people are inclined to whip out some spreadsheets. Based? Well, I wouldn't not do the first thing. Again, I think it's a bit of a false dichotomy, but that's all right. These two groups often end up suspicious of each other, each exasperated to have allies who refuse to do what it takes. Yeah, I mean, probably some of those real, splash themselves with blood people regard me as lazy, perhaps. Probably I am in some ways, right? Compared to people who are willing to get up early and make their placards or whatever. I mean, I don't mean to say that too dismissively, but in fact, I don't mean to say it dismissively at all. I think it's incredibly important that some people are doing those things. Again, I think it is a. I was just saying earlier to my buddy about the RSPCA label debacle. Ultimately, I do think it's a good thing that RSPCA has some sort of welfare certification scheme that are substantially higher than the legal minimum standards. It is also going to be the case that when you do have such a scheme, there will be violations of those standards. That's just always going to happen. And it's also a good thing that there are then animal activists to call them out on that and say, this scheme's not doing what it's supposed to be doing. You need to administer it better or structure it better or something. So I think, those two, what seem to be kind of oppositional forces, are really more leaning on each other and supporting each other in a way, right? It's good that there is this kind of standard, but it's good that there are also activists who go hard at the people administering it when they don't do a good job. And, hopefully that kind of synthesis and, causes progress, right? We'll see. One could write an entire book about the culture clashes as effective altruism-oriented giving entered the animal advocacy space. Effective altruists were also making a splash in other areas like global health and development or biosecurity or AI, but those were all areas where a lot of money was already being spent from many sources. Farmed animal advocacy by contrast was not. Effective animal advocates rapidly became a huge source of spending in the space, and their philosophy of how to do good became prominent. Based. That understandably led to frustration from people with other theories of how to do good, theories they'd often spent decades working on with very little funding. But ultimately, almost everyone involved should agree the effective animal advocacy movement should be evaluated not by how they made humans feel, but by how their work impacted animals. Yeah, that's the tough part, hey, because we do feel how we feel, and that does have to be navigated with more grace than perhaps I tend to lend. No, I'm not American, Jay. I'm British. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah, I mean, I've never watched Dominion. I'm not gonna lie. I've never watched Earthlings either. Um, I think I don't need to because I'm vegan. There could still be some benefits of reinforcing my commitment or something like that, but I don't think I need to traumatize myself anytime soon. Um, I'm already doing quite a bit, right? Stronger Together. A decade on, the philosophy of incremental and numbers-oriented welfare work has gotten a lot done. One recent blog post published by the Open Philanthropy Project, which has funded effective animal advocacy work, lays out how they did it. The Open Wing Alliance, a coalition of animal advocacy organizations, zeroed in on corporations as a good target for pressure to improve conditions. Hey, that's what we do on Vegan 2.0. We might do a bit of Fast Action Network later. Since these corporations tend to sell eggs to consumers, they care about their reputation. Yeah, indeed. The Open Wing Alliance would effectively offer them a deal. Commit to going cage-free or else. Protesters will mobilize online and on the ground. They'll show up in chicken costumes at corporate headquarters and franchise locations. Public ads and social media shame campaigns will further drive negative press. The Open Wing Alliance will do its best to make the target's brand synonymous with animal cruelty if they refuse to make necessary welfare improvements. This is based as hell. They really go hard on the companies. I mean, you've seen the kind of stuff that we do on on the Fast Action Network. It's really they don't hold back, right? They make the websites with the CEO's name and face on there. They will do they make these videos that we go and spam on the social media accounts. I've seen a lot of people doing that on the posts that I've done. I don't know if those are people who have come from my stream, but I'm going to say that they are. So yeah, they really go hard against companies that don't play ball and make cage-free commitments, which has again been decided as a strategic thing, and then they'll go hard against their stakeholders in a strategic and systematic way as well. In an important way, this represents a synthesis of the two threads of the animal advocacy movement that I encountered back when I was a college student. Suit-wearing lobbying types get the meetings with corporations and make demands carefully chosen based on rigorous analysis of which asks do the most for animals. But the corporation's reason to go along is that should they refuse, they will face protesters willing to put their bodies on the line for animals. Yeah, that's a really nice way of putting it, right? This is the synthesis of those two approaches. The pragmatists need the idealists, as I said in a video about this. It's proven to be a very powerful tactic. Hundreds of pledges have been made, and broadly they've been kept. Hundreds of millions of chickens live lives that are still pretty horrifying, but still significantly better than they'd otherwise have been. One estimate concluded that compared to a hen raised in a cage, each hen raised cage-free will spend 275 fewer hours in disabling pain and thousands of hours less time in lower levels of pain. Well, that's good. Nobody wants 275 hours of disabling pain. This is like this is some sort of pain scale, of which this is the worst points, right? No one is declaring victory. I think that's such an important thing to say, right? With us lobbying types don't want to actually stop at the welfare improvements. That's just the imminent step. Usually the criticism of that approach is that it's not enough, and that's just not a criticism of that approach, because people having that approach agree largely. No one is declaring victory, but it seems like negotiation and threat of protest strategy is a highly cost-effective way to improve conditions for animals. Yeah, I mean, that's great. It's really cool. This is a great article. It's really cool that the two threads of advocacy, as they put it, have come together in such a mutually supportive way. Exactly as I described, like with the RSPCA and the more grassroots protesters. I think both are needed. It's also kind of nice that the answer to a lot of these squabbles about what is the best approach is that we need a bit of everything. And hey, that was also kind of the message of the last thing that we read as well, right? Where we didn't have any strong consensus on this, and so the best approach is probably to spread your bets and diversify your strategy. And this streamer's diversification for me. I'm a researcher, really. So doing this is me having like somewhat of a long shot on trying to share research in a bit more of a engaging way, and hope that that catches on to some extent. You know, we do all right. We do all right. If you're here, like the stream, you don't have to watch Dominion Bowl non-vegan stew. True, Oppenheimer. Nice to see you. Thanks for joining. The road ahead. Of course, it's impossible to imagine fully addressing the horrors of factory farming with this approach, or with any single approach. Corporations will change their policies if it's relatively inexpensive to do so, but it's hard to imagine them adopting the much more expensive changes that would be necessary to give animals intensively raised on factory farms good lives. And plenty of animal advocates wouldn't be happy even if you did pull that off. They'd like us to stop raising billions of animals in captivity to kill and eat, not just be nicer about doing so. I mean, yeah, I'd put myself in that camp ultimately. I mean, I would be happy if you pulled it off, but I wouldn't be happy to the extent that I would stop. I'd be happy but not satisfied. How about that? And the most unpleasant feature of factory farming is that, unlike nearly all of the world's problems, so far it has gotten worse as the world has gotten richer. Very true. As more and more people enter the global middle class and can afford cheap meat, it creates incentives for more companies to horrendously mistreat animals. For all the progress I've discussed, more animals in the US are factory farmed now than when I was in college. On a problem as big as this one, you can accomplish a ton and still have an unfathomable distance to go. Damn, that's so true. That could be the tagline of Vegan 2.0, honestly. There is just so much that can be done and bettered here that doing a fraction of 1% of all of it is still, well, you know, hours and years of disabling pain, as we've read here. But when I look at the state of animal advocacy in 2024, I'm optimistic. Since a decade ago, there's been a serious maturation of the field. It has integrated the many varying perspectives on what advocates are trying to achieve, and somewhat grown past the frictions of very different people trying to work together toward a common goal. And people have accomplished real and worthy things, and learned a lot about what works. The stakes remain enormous, and the situation remains stomach-churningly terrible, but many of the arguments I remember having in college are ones that the movement has now substantially moved past. Disruptive protests or polished advocacy? Why not one as a strategy to produce the other, like how labor unions do it? Is it worth advocating for incremental change? Looks like yes, it definitely is. Do people from different subcultures and with different perspectives really care about animals despite all the mutual distrust? Looks like yes, they do. At the same time, I've seen many other advocacy groups run aground on such differences. It's worth occasionally taking a step back to be impressed with the achievements of animal advocates, and if you work on any other high-stakes, depressingly entrenched ill in our world, to learn from them. That was a great article. We should read more from this Vox Future Perfect. This is like, you know, accessible journalism about effective altruism themes, and they do a lot about animal advocacy stuff. Well done, Kelsey Piper. I enjoyed this article a lot. Yeah, the it's funny. I was doing the disagreements as we came through some of this part, and I think I don't know if there are disagreements so much as just differences in approach. All sorts of different approaches can be valid and helpful. Um, and this is just a really cool example of how different approaches can work together and rely on each other. Right, the people who are just going into the lobbying meetings and the suit wearing lobbyist types can't actually do anything without the fake blood and marching down the street types. And the fake blood and marching down the street types, why not go with the lobbying types who are also vegans and pro animal, who are trying to do things incrementally but are never saying that that's enough or that that's where it ends. Like I said, on these welfare improvements, I'd be happy but not satisfied. I think that's a good attitude to take in the incremental improvement of conditions for animals. And again, I always say this, but a big part of the reason why you want to impose animal welfare standards is increasing the cost of farming animals, not necessarily just improving the welfare standards of the animals which are still farmed, because there are going to be fewer animals farmed overall, right?